Idealist philosophy is true. Materialist philosophy is false. Why, then, is materialism the all-conquering paradigm accepted by the intelligentsia? And why is Bernardo Kastrup seen as one of the most prominent advocates of idealism when he has simply rehashed the philosophy of Schopenhauer, who was in his turn a rehasher of Kant's transcendental idealism, which was enormously critiqued in its time by other idealist philosophers, especially Hegel? Why doesn't Kastrup follow Hegel rather than Schopenhauer, as the vast majority of idealists did? Idealism is correct, but the likes of Schopenhauer, Kant, and, today, Kastrup, are totally wrong in their comprehension of it. To understand why, let's go back to a decisive moment in philosophy, the dawn of modern philosophy with Descartes. Descartes presented the philosophical position that most people intuitively believe to be true: dualism. Dualism means that matter is real and mind is real, and mind can control matter via a body, and survive the death of the body because it is not the body and not part of the body. The body dies, the mind continues. The average person believes that he has an immaterial soul, which is in his body during life and then leaves it at death to go to immaterial heaven, which is somehow up there. Descartes gave a very simple definition of both mind and matter. He said that mind, thinking substance, res cogitans, was unextended, and matter, non-thinking substance, res extensa, was extended. This was a breathtaking advance in how to think about the mind in relation to matter because it was so stunningly simple and clear. The mind was immaterial, and, when understood properly, not in space and time, the framework for furnishing extension. The body, by contrast, was material and in space and time. Descartes was a philosophical and mathematical genius, but his system of dualism contained one enormous problem that could not be overcome. How did mind and matter coexist and interact given that they had opposite definitions? Descartes himself didn't actually perceive the scale of this problem and proposed that the unextended mind interacted with the extended body primarily through the pineal gland in the brain, where it directed the animal spirits. The what now? What are these animal spirits? Kurt Smith, professor in the Department of Philosophy, Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania, wrote, Sonia Marie Scott argues that for Descartes the animal spirits play a central role in the mediation between mind and body, where they mediate between the rational and non-rational by their effect on the pineal gland. As Scott rightly points out, Descartes took the animal spirits to function as communicators of motion, and with respect to the human body, as communicators of motions to and from the interior cavity of the brain, in which the pineal gland was located. Suppose that one is pricked with a pin. The story, or at least part of it, of how one feels the prick goes as follows. The pin introduces motion into the tiny particles that constitute the skin. This motion is communicated to the nerves, which are tiny tubules filled with a mist constituted of very fine particles, the animal spirits. The motion is quickly communicated by way of this system of fine particles through the nerves and into the interior cavity of the brain. There, the animal spirits might communicate this motion to the pineal gland, perhaps moving it ever so slightly in one direction or another. This movement, instituted by God, would occasion, say, an idea of pain. Of course, this pain isn't simply thought, but, as Descartes says, is felt, and in particular, is felt at the location of the prick. The phenomenology here is difficult at best, for Descartes says very little about the phenomenological difference between having an idea of pain and feeling pain. So, the account of union is still murky. But the role of the animal spirits is clear enough. They serve as communicators of motion. Now, as Scott also notes, the notion of animal spirits had been around long before Descartes. They were typically understood, as I say above, to be fine particles, a large collection of such particles appearing like a gas or a mist to the naked eye, if they were visible at all. The vapor emitted by ammonia, for instance, might serve as an example of animal spirits. If one were to take a whiff, one's head would immediately snap back. The idea here is that the particles constituting this vapor are so small that they moved through the porous parts of the skull and entered directly into the interior cavity of the brain, where they moved the pineal gland, producing in the one smelling the ammonia the snapping back of the head. But gases and mists and the like are, on Descartes' view, systems of very small particles whirling about. Scott says that they are like bodies. But on Descartes' view they are not like bodies, they are bodies. They are in essence no different from the pin, the skin particles, the nerve tubules, the brain, or the pineal gland, or from even the empty space that separates these things. The only difference is a modal one. Each particle is very small and moves very fast. It is not clear why Scott casts the animal spirits as mediators between mind and body. Doing so, especially if the animal spirits are understood to be corporeal, completely ignores the mind-body problem, originally raised by Princess Elizabeth. If the animal spirits are bodies, even though very small, that will not explain how they interact with mind. For, as was noted in the preliminary section, minds do not have surfaces since they do not have shapes, and they do not have shapes since they are not extended. How will the mind come into contact with a body, regardless of size, or how will a body come into contact with the mind, if the mind has no surface with which to come into contact? How is interaction possible? The introduction of the animal spirits will not solve this problem, and there is no evidence to suggest that Descartes thought that his having introduced them solved it. His view was that although our sensory experience constantly demonstrates to us that mind and body do interact, there was ultimately no way for us to understand or to conceive how they do. It was a union instituted by God, and that was about as good an account as could be given. So, as we see from this great account of animal spirits, Descartes resorted to a deus ex machina maneuver to explain the interaction between mind and body. God was the backstop, the ultimate explanation. Although mind and matter had nothing in common, God had, by a divine miracle, we must presume, allowed mind the capacity to influence body. We might think of the unextended mind telepathically sending thought instructions to the pineal gland and God providing the means for those thoughts to be translated into physical changes in the motions of animal spirits. Hence the mind controlled the body via its thoughts. Equally, changes in the pineal gland occasioned by the subtle motions of animal spirits would be relayed back to the mind to be experienced as pain, or whatever. Philosophy was having none of this Cartesian reliance on God, and it split into two opposing camps, the materialists and the idealists. The materialists denied any such thing as unextended existence, i.e., they denied mind and they denied thought. Instead, they said that everything was extended matter and so, whatever it is that we mean when we refer to mind and thought necessarily originated in extended things, in material atoms. This is the prevailing view today. Scientists believe mind and thinking to be an epiphenomenon or emergent property of activity occurring in a material brain. No brain, no mind. No brain, no thinking or feeling. The material brain is the root of the illusion of mind and thinking. Some philosophers have pointed out that the mind and thinking and feeling are pointless in this system. No one believes that a computer has a mind and thinks and feels. So, why believe that a brain does? The idealists took the opposite view from the materialists. For them, mind was the only reality. Thinking substance was everything, and one of the things it did was to think what we regard as extended matter into existence. This matter had no reality in itself. It was the product, the construct, of mind and its thoughts. The signature example of what idealists propose is the dream. People can dream up whole worlds while they are asleep and no one anywhere says that these constructed worlds are material and have real extension. Dream worlds are worlds that seem exactly like material worlds yet are contained exclusively within the mind of the dreamer, and were generated by that mind. We could easily, therefore, imagine the mind of God, or, alternatively, some vast collection of minds, thinking the material world into existence. So, underlying science's spacetime universe of matter is actually a mental entity that science cannot access. This is the foundational claim of idealism. It's not a claim that what people take to be matter doesn't exist. Instead, it's a claim that mind is primary and matter its construct, rather than the opposite way around, as in materialism. Some people tried to advance a different solution by proposing a different form of Cartesian dualism, namely one where immaterial minds and material bodies both existed, but immaterial minds were in fact extended, and that's how mind could interact with matter. They were in direct contact. Isaac Newton believed this, and his theory of gravity more or less relies on the mind of God to serve as the medium, allowing vastly distant things to exert an instantaneous gravitational effect on each other. But if mind is extended and affects the extended material order, we should be able to detect it scientifically. Not one scientist on Earth believes in extended mind or is seeking it. Science absolutely believes that mind is redundant, and no scientist can conceive of immaterial substance, whether extended or not. Which is rather odd given that light is immaterial and massless and is maximally time-dilated and length-contracted, literally meaning that light is the perfect candidate to denote unextended, immaterial Cartesian mind, outside space and time. Hold that thought. See the light. More in Part 2.